Hi, welcome to the City Rev Life podcast. Whether you're joining us again or for the first time, we're so glad you're listening in. And if you hear anything that you enjoy or want to post a comment, please feel free to do so, as well as share us on your social media. We'd love to connect with more and more people. Today I have with me a very dear friend to our church, Melissa Kepper, coming from Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, Melissa.
Hey, Rebecca. I'm excited to be with you guys.
We're so glad to have you. Melissa and her husband, Stephen, used to be a part of our church family in South Florida. And you moved in what year? 2015?
2015.
Yep.
It's been 5 years. I can't believe it.
That's right, 5 years. So they are still part of our church extended family. They're in Charlotte, and they currently have 5 children. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your children, Melissa?
So, like you said, we have 5, so there's no shortage of excitement at our house. Our oldest 2 are Joanna and JJ, and they are our unconventional they are actually 18 days apart in age, and both came to us from foster care. And we have Silas, who is 6 years old. Fun little fact. He was born the exact same day as Rebecca's little girl, Scarlett.
That's right.
So they're birthday
Yep.
twins. And Selah just turned 4, and Ezekiel is about to turn 2.
Great. Wow. Yeah, it's a full house for sure.
Yes.
Well, that's really great. Well, we're going to get into a little bit about your story and about your family in detail a little bit more. But I'll just first start off by saying that you added to your family through foster care and adoption while you were down here in South Florida. And in some ways, in many ways, you and Stephen were the pioneers for foster care at our church. When it became when we became aware of it, I was working at the lead agency that you guys partnered with, and our church was becoming more and more involved. And so I can think of, Melissa, like maybe at least 4 families that kind of jumped on that train with you guys soon after you trailblazed that territory for us. So it's been a legacy for sure that you guys have left.
That's really encouraging. I love seeing what's going on at City Rev Church right now in regard to foster care. Trust me, I follow you guys very closely.
Oh, that's really great. Oh, we're honored by that. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit first? You started your family through foster care. What was that journey like for you? What was the moment that you knew, okay, this is how we are going to start this next chapter in our lives by beginning with foster care to start our family?
So really, it started probably about in like 2007 is when it first came on our radar. Stephen and I had been married for 3 years. We didn't have any biological children yet, and we were living in South Florida, and just started meeting people that were involved in the foster care system. I really was unexposed to foster care. I had always thought I might adopt. For me, the only thing I knew about adoption was international adoptions. So we met you, and you were working as a support worker at 4 Kids. And then there was another lady in our church who was in our small group, and she's doing fundraising for another organization, foster organization. And she actually asked Stephen to come do, Stephen's in law enforcement, so she asked him to come do like a career presentation at one of the shelters. I had no idea what a shelter was. I'm like, what do you mean? There's kids that have to stay in a shelter and they're not in a home. So that was really eye-opening for both Stephen and me. We went there, we met the kids. They're just everyday kids. And it's, again, one of those situations where you just kind of walk out of it and you're like, man, someone should really do something about this. Yeah. And I always say, be careful if you say that, because a lot of times the Lord is going to hold up a mirror and be like, and who's to say that someone isn't you? So then it was just this kind of journey of the Lord opening our eyes to the needs around us, perusing the heart gallery and seeing 17-year-old boys, these big masculine boys who are men, just saying, I just want someone to call mom and dad. And that just struck our hearts in the Lord, just through scripture and through a particular sermon series at West Pines. Just really opened our eyes to the needs of foster care and the fact that it was something that the Lord could use us to make an impact in our.
That's really great. I love how you put that when you say, you know, we became the answer to our own prayer request. That as you thought about, wow, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few, that God's like, guess what? You get to be one of those workers that gets to reap a harvest. And you really brought in and discipled many and hopefully pointed many to Christ. I know that you did. So it's cool that you're able to see how the Lord used you to be the answer to your own prayer request. Okay, so tell us then after that a little bit what your first placement was like. You know, how did the kids come? What was it like? How did it end?
So we started our process in the fall of 2008. And what's really cool about the foster care process is for us and for most of the people I know, it took about 9 months to go through all the classes and the licensing and everything and get your approval, which is pretty neat because when you have a biological child, you have 9 months to prepare, and it gives you 9 months to really prepare for this journey that you're about to embark on, and really to build your community too, because you're going to need community around you. So we got licensed in late April of 2009, and it was about 2 weeks later that we got our very first placement. So our license was actually for sibling groups. My husband and I just kind of looked at each other. We looked at this 3-bedroom house that was bigger than anything we needed and just said, you know, the Lord's blessed us with this and we want to use it to be a blessing. And it actually just absolutely broke our hearts to learn that when kids come into foster care, sibling groups, a lot of times there's just not a home for them to go to for all of them. So they end up having to split them up. And I just know my childhood, what a comfort my sister was. I can't imagine losing everything that's familiar to me and then my siblings going somewhere else on top of that. So we were at a perfect stage, a perfect place to be able to take in sibling groups. So our first placement was a 5-year-old boy and twin 4-year-olds. That was a sibling group of 3. And I remember when we first got the call,
Wow.
I was at work and they just tell you kind of basic information. And it's just like, well, yes, we'll take them. And, you know, couldn't focus very well at work after that. Rushed home and had to get everything ready and then went to the shelter to pick them up. And by the time we got to the shelter, it was kind of late. And I can remember that the twins were both asleep. And so, you know, carrying them to the car, the workers are helping us. And then the 5-year-old is just wailing. I mean, wailing. And he pretty much did that the whole way home. Stephen drove. We had a minivan. We had bought a minivan to become foster parents. Because what cool 20-something-year-old without kids doesn't want a minivan? And so I sat in the back seat with him. I sat in the back seat with him and just kind of stroked his arm and just sing some worship songs and prayed over him and just couldn't imagine what was going through his little heart and his mind at that moment. So that was our introduction. Those boys stayed with us for a week, and then they ended up going with a grandma. And I say that kind of like just matter of factly, but in that week, they just really captured our hearts. And when I got the phone call, I had just gotten them ready for bed, and my husband was actually on a work trip. And I got the phone call saying, they're going to go with grandma. You need to bring them over to safe place right now. It was like 7:30 at night. I was like, what do you mean? I don't get to say goodbye. Like, it was just so abrupt. And, you know, ultimately it was a good thing for those boys. They got to be with family and they were staying together, but it was hard. I was heartbroken. And that wouldn't be the first time that I would be heartbroken in the process, but the Lord was always faithful.
Yeah, and like you said, they stayed like a week and they already captured your heart. And I think even the next day you asked for some time off from work even.
I did.
Is that right?
I called my boss. Thankfully, I had the most amazing boss. And she knew they had thrown me a shower at work to become a foster parent. It was just really neat to see how people around me just really
Wow.
this
That's
journey.
great.
And so she told me to take the time, and literally I just stayed at home and just kind of mourned the loss of those boys, and prayed over them and the journey that was still ahead of them and their case plan and everything. And we took a few days. We told them we just need a few days before we take a new placement to just kind of get on the right footing. And our next placement came pretty quickly within a week.
Yeah. Yeah. So then your next placement that you had was definitely a longer journey. Just to sum up, you know, in a short version, is a sibling group of 2 came to your home and then went back to a family member, and then they re-entered the foster care system. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about the length of time, a little bit about the kids that were in your home, and you know, as you're on this side of that whole experience, what do you feel like you would have wanted to tell yourself then? Like, what's your now self? What would your now self tell your then self about what you were experiencing or how to cope better? Why don't you give us a little bit about the journey with them and advice that you'd give to yourself?
Okay, so yes, our next placement ended up being a almost 2-year-old and an 8-month-old, almost 2-year-old girl and an 8-month-old boy. And they stayed in our home for almost 2 years. And so those were my first babies. Wow. I still say that. They were my first babies because, you know, I taught them how to talk and we did potty training. And for 2 years, those first 2 years, I just loved them as much as I could love anyone. And then they went back. It was actually during that time that I had them that we found out about our daughter, Joanna, and she was more of a foster to adopt placement. So she came into our home during that time, and we finalized her adoption while they were still living with us. So then we had a 1, 2, and 3-year-old at that time. So,
wow.
Yes.
Busy.
Yes. For some reason, my house is always busy. I haven't been out of that season for 10 years now. And
That's right.
And on the heels of that, we actually found out about Jeremiah too, my oldest son. And for a while, we thought we were going to have all 4 of them in the house. And we're like, oh my goodness, how are we going to manage that? And what's really funny is that's, as I'll get to in the story, that was just kind of a little foreshadowing of what was to come, a little bit, almost 2 years from that point. So the 2 went back with, like you said, with a family member. And that was incredibly hard for me because they had been with me for 2 years. And I mean, talk about, you know, intimately involved in their life. They're little, you know, we did everything. And it was heart-wrenching to say goodbye to them. And we were allowed to see them once, and then communication was cut off, and it was kind of this back and forth, but it was an ultimate trusting the Lord that he is God, he is good, and he is sovereign. He's in control of all things. And he could have kept them in our home, and he chose not to. And I have to believe and trust in his sovereignty and know that he's working all things for the good. That's in their life and my life, and that it's serving a purpose. Even though I am heartbroken, and my little Joanna would ask for them. She was a 1.5 years old at the time, and she would ask for them. And I would just say, let's pray for them, baby. And she learned at an early age just to start praying for them anytime she thought about them. So try to fast forward a little bit the story. We end up adopting Jeremiah. He moved in with us a month after they went back finalizing his adoption, we ended up with
Okay.
2 teenage boy foster placements in that interim. And then it was
That's right.
a year and a half after they went back with a family member that I got a phone call. So at that time I had a 16-year-old, and Joanna and JJ had just turned 3. And I got the phone call that they were coming back into care, and this time with baby brother. So I didn't even call Steven. I just said, yes, we'll take them. We'll figure it out later. 6 kids, hammocks. Like, what can we do?
Oh my goodness.
And I'll just never forget. I started making phone calls. I mean, I know you were, I want to say you were the first one after my husband, but you might have been before my husband, but well, you know. But we started making phone calls, and it was amazing. This was really when I saw the church really start to step up and just serve us in our ministry and allow us to allow us to keep our sanity during this crazy time, because we ended up with 2-year-old, 2 3-year-olds, a 4-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and they had some traumatic backgrounds, so it wasn't always easy. And now I think you guys have a set ministry, FAM, I believe, that comes alongside foster parents.
Yeah.
But back then it was just kind of grassroots, and it was someone with a pickup truck saying, yes, I'll go pick up bunk beds for you and Boca, so that they have somewhere to sleep. And it's someone saying, I will tutor the 16-year-old in math. And at that time, 4 different ladies from the church volunteered to come over. They had one night of the week, and they would come over for 2 to 3 hours. And they would help me with bedtime and bath time and homework, because Destiny was in kindergarten. So they really just stepped up and filled needs. I had meals delivered. It's just really neat for people who, for various reasons, might not be in the position of foster, but feel called to do something. You can support a foster family because they need it. They need it.
Yeah.
So they were with us for another year after that. And that, in the meantime, I ended up getting pregnant. And you're asking what I would tell my former self about this time, because it was hard to say goodbye to him the first time, and then I dreaded having to do it a second time, because I knew that was likely the outcome. And after 3 years of being in our home and my kids getting attached to them again, it was hard to think about. But the way that the Lord used this experience to deepen my faith and my trust in him, like I talked about, in his sovereignty, and just learning to know that I know that I know that he is good and he is in control. So I don't have to fear what the outcome is. You know, we pray for them and we do everything that we're called to do to love them and be wise, but ultimately I leave the outcome in his hand. That would be really important for the journey that we were to embark on right after. Actually, it started right before they went home. So my first biological son, Silas, was born on July 22nd. And all 3 of the foster kids were still in our home. And we had no idea the journey we were going to be on with Silas. And his first year of life was very complicated, to put it mildly. Complicated as in 40 days in the NICU, 4 PICU visits, life flights. I did CPR on my child multiple times, and it was just rough. And there were times where I wasn't sure if he was going to make it. I wasn't sure if the Lord was going to call my baby home sooner than I could have ever imagined. But it was those lessons that I learned in fostering about really trusting the Lord, that no matter if I don't get the outcome that I am praying for and that I am desperately hoping for, that he has me, that he wants good for me. and that he loves my child. He loved those
Yeah.
foster babies more than I could ever.
Yeah.
He loves my child more than I could ever imagine. And ultimately to keep that open hand and just say, Lord, I trust you. Even if it's hard, even if it's not the answer that I want, I trust you.
It's amazing how on the heels of that loss with saying goodbye to the three again, that you are immediately thrust into another season where you would be as equally aware that you are not in control. And how God used, I mean, that's to put it mildly, being having a front row seat to both of these journeys. I can testify that it was not anything you could imagine, or want to imagine ever as a parent. But I think what you're saying, and some of the wisdom that I've gleaned from, and know others have too, is that, foster care puts in front of you something that kind of can be hidden with your biological children, in that you're not in control.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to say who or when or a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do because it's your home, but the reality is they come with a caseworker, they come with a judge, they do have some biological connections. And so things like visits and certain doctor's appointments and this and that are somewhat told for you. Mm-hmm. And so there is no illusion of control with foster care, the good and the bad with that. And then you are immediately thrust into a journey where, again, you were reminded that God is in control, and just being very soberly reminded of that. And it sounds like that just really deepened your understanding of how God's goodness and his power and his control can still exist when there's a situation that maybe doesn't necessarily agree with you. Does that sound about right? Like with your experience?
Perfectly stated. Perfectly stated.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more just about some of the support that you received. You talked a little bit about the meals and things like that, and you're right, we do have a program that I'll speak into in a minute, but just what was that like for you? How do you feel like that impacted your journey?
It was, I mean, personally, I don't know how we would have survived that year of having 5 littles without the church stepping up. I mean, it's just a lot of stress. I mean, it's a lot of logistics too. So just people being willing to say, I don't know how it is now. At the time, you had to become licensed to be a babysitter, and say, I'm willing to go through the process. Mm-hmm. I'll become licensed so that once a month, I'll commit to once a month to babysit your kids so you can actually work on your marriage. That was huge because, my husband and I still needed to be standing together at the end of that journey. And we needed people to walk alongside us so that we could do that. Other people, their gifting was food, and I still have some of those recipes today, and they committed to every week bringing us a meal. And it was just so nice for me to have something taken off my plate that logistically I just didn't have to figure out. Towards the end, we had some people say, I can drive the kids to their visit with their mom, because that was about a 3-hour ordeal. And that was 3 hours then that I could focus on Joanna and JJ, or, when I had Silas, I could be at the hospital. We just had so many people just really step up. And a lot of those people are just lifelong friends now because they walked that journey with me. They prayed with me. They saw the good, the bad, the ugly. I mean, you're letting someone into your home and into your life. But isn't that what community's about? Like, instead of just always trying to put forward this image, no, I just need you to get in the trenches with me and walk alongside me. And you're going to probably learn things about me that might be surprising, but I just need someone to be real and walk with me on this journey. It was why we could continue for the 5 years that we fostered. It's the reason we could keep doing it.
Yeah, well, and you're describing what hopefully FAM does do now, which is a program that For Kids of South Florida has designed to partner with churches to wrap around the foster families in their church or at least in their community so that they don't feel isolated or alone. Foster parents feel supported because, like you said, someone may not be in a season where that's their calling right now, but they can make a meal. And they can, I think someone even mowed your lawn at one point.
Yes.
Someone saw a need and they'd jump in and they'd meet it. And so that helps support you to carry a part of the journey that only you can do. You were attached to those kiddos and you saw their journey through to the end. So it sounds like it really was a huge support and something that we're wanting to continue to grow in as we implement the FAM program even at our church. So
Amazing.
well, why don't you close us with this? Yeah, it is amazing to watch and see. Tell us then, this is a question that I know that I get, or at least I used to get a lot when I worked at 4Kids. I know that you get sometimes as a foster parent is just, oh gosh, I hear your story and goodness, I could just never do that, or I could just never give the kids back. And that's a very honest question. I appreciate that question. I don't think you can enter into this journey without ever asking that question, at least at some point. So how have you wrestled with that question, or what would you say to someone who asks you that question?
So I look at it as, first I try to figure out the why behind their asking it. Like, are they saying it logistically? Like, there's just no way I could do this. I have a special needs child, or, we're going through a rough place in our marriage, or some other reason that logistically, really, they're right. They just can't do this. But I would say if the Lord is putting it on your heart, then maybe it's not the right season, or maybe that you're called to support other foster families. So don't just ignore that call, because there's other ways to get involved. Now, for people who they're saying it for an emotional reason, like, I just don't know how I could get attached and then let that child go. It's a very honest conversation of, you're right. It's hard. I've cried so many tears. I was sharing with you the other day, I sent you a video when I said goodbye to my foster son that was with me for 3 years on and off. And we made a little video before we dropped him off at his mom's house for the last time. And that's the last time I've ever saw him. And I still watch that video and just miss him. But in that video, I asked him, I was like, what's the one thing I want you to remember that you learned? At that time, because they'd been with us so long, he wanted to call us mommy and daddy. We had other foster names, Mia and Keppy, but so I said, what did you learn at mommy and daddy's house? And he said that Jesus loves me, and that Jesus died on the cross for me. And so that is just the truth that I pray is deep in his soul, that he will come back to. And I'm the adult in this situation. I can deal with the heartache and the pain, if that means bring hope and healing to a child who didn't ask to be in the situation that they're in, through no fault of their own, is finding themselves just their life completely upheaved. And I just trust that if the Lord's calling me to it, then he's going to be my sufficiency. My tears are not wasted. My broken heart is not wasted. Even those 3 boys that were with me for a short time, I still pray for them and pray that we'll have a sweet reunion in heaven, and maybe I'll get a glimpse to see the journey. My life intersected with theirs, and we just know, but I just know that I have to be faithful for the time gives me. So it's not an easy question, because you're right, it's hard, and I'm not going to try to sugarcoat that. But as Christians, we're called to do hard things, to show the love of Jesus to a broken world. So I guess I would encourage someone that if they feel that the Lord is calling them to this, don't let fear be the reason that you don't continue on this journey. Give it to the Lord and let him help you work through that fear, because he's able.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You really are pointing out, just as you consider the Lord's heart for the orphan, and you acquaint yourselves, look at those scriptures and learn how God views that calling. And if the Lord continues to cultivate your heart, he will bring you through that. And there's times and there's seasons when I've seen families go through the process and then God shut the door. Like, this is not the time yet. A ailing parent had to move in suddenly, or, something with a child came up, and that's okay. And the Lord brought them through that part of the journey for a reason. And then they became one of the best advocates at their church, or supported the foster families, and eventually became a foster parent themselves. So I think it's a great question to ask, and you answer it so honestly and soberly too, that it's not an easy question. But at the same time, if every foster parent waited until they got to a place where, okay, now I could give the child back, then we would never have any foster parents, because you really don't get to that point,
Never.
do you?
At least not for me.
Yeah.
I can only speak for myself.
So I don't think you ever really get to that point, and I don't think you ever should. I think it should always be a sobering moment. And that's, I think, the faith that the Lord will carry you through that. And you are a living testimony that he has multiple times. So, well, thanks for encouraging us with your story. Just any final thoughts that you have that you'd like to leave with us?
My encouragement to you would just be, if you feel like the Lord is starting to put this on your heart, then just take the first step. Don't look at the journey down the road and where it might lead. Just take the next step. Find out more about, go on the 4Kids website. There's usually informational meetings you can attend. Acquaint yourself with what it means for a modern day orphan, and just allow the Lord to guide your journey. So he'll open and close those doors. Just, I guess my encouragement would be, don't let fear be the driving factor, because if we never step out in faith, then we're not going to be making an impact. And that's what we're called to do, is to make an impact in our people around us and in our cities, and we're making an impact for Christ. So if this is what the Lord is putting on your heart, he will equip you for this impact.
Yeah. Well, and you have so eloquently, illustrated that you are so blessed, probably more than you thought you were going to be a blessing. And even though those blessings do come with some tears and some hardships, you become and reflect more of the likeness of Christ. And who wouldn't want that to be part of your legacy on this planet and on this earth, and to leave with your children? And so just encouragement to you. Steve and Melissa, you guys are doing a fabulous job with your kids, and your testimony is just still so encouraging and so inspiring, and really part of the foundation of our church. Your story is, as we've embarked on this foster care journey and supporting and encouraging others. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys so much. We love City Rev. You guys will always be a part of us, and we'll always be a part of you guys. So we're not easy to get rid of.
Well, listen, if you'd like to find out anything more about being a foster parent, or even about our family advocacy ministry, we would love to get you more information. That if you would email us at foster@cityrev.org, and we'll have more information on how to get connected with both of those. So thank you, Melissa Kepper, again, and join us next time on our City Rev Life podcast.
Thank you for joining us on City Rev Life. You can subscribe to this podcast, rate and review wherever you're listening to this. And we love it when you share it with your friends on social media. For more videos and content, go ahead and check us out at cityrev.org/podcast, or download our City Rev Church app. Have a great day.